The most daring sea voyage in human history did not begin on a ship. It began with a hungry child asking for bread at the door of a convent, while the world laughed at his father's impossible dream. More than 4 centuries ago, in the busy Italian port city of Genoa, a poor craftsman raised 4 sons. One of them, born around 1446, was Christopher Columbus. His childhood home stood in a crowded part of the city where wool workers lived and labored. The house was small and gloomy, yet history later gave it great importance. Genoa eventually preserved the building and placed a Latin inscription on its wall, honoring the boy who would grow up there and change the world. Columbus's father earned his living by preparing wool for weaving, and young Christopher learned the same trade. Yet Genoa itself became his first teacher. The city was alive with sailors, merchants, and ships bound for distant lands. From the shore, the boy could watch fishing boats glide out with sharp, triangular sails, and merchant vessels disappear beyond the horizon. Though he worked with wool by day, his imagination likely followed those ships into unknown seas. Life was not easy for Columbus. He was poor and had to earn his own way, but he valued learning. Despite limited means, he studied hard, learning Latin, developing fine handwriting, and mastering the drawing of maps and sea charts. These skills later allowed him to support himself. In his 20s, he began traveling, and by his late 20s, he committed fully to life as a sailor, slowly gaining the experience that would prepare him for bold exploration. During this era, sailors feared the Atlantic Ocean, calling it the Sea of Darkness. Most voyages stayed within the Mediterranean. Many believed the ocean hid terrifying monsters or boiling waters, and few imagined land beyond it. America was unknown, and Africa was thought to stretch endlessly southward. Trade with Asia depended on long camel caravans carrying spices and silks across harsh deserts. While Columbus was still young, a Portuguese prince named Henry, later known as Henry the Navigator, began sponsoring voyages along Africa's coast in hopes of reaching Asia by sea. His expeditions revealed much of Africa's shoreline and inspired sailors across Europe. Drawn by this spirit of discovery, Columbus traveled to Portugal, sailed along the African coast, and even journeyed far north beyond England, making him unusually well-traveled for his time. Unlike the Portuguese explorers, who cautiously hugged the African coastline, Columbus imagined a daring alternative, sailing straight west to reach Asia. He believed the Earth was round and much smaller than it truly is. He never expected to find a new continent, only a shorter route to the riches of the East. Columbus first offered his plan to Portugal's king, but Prince Henry was already dead. The king's advisors mocked the proposal and refused Columbus's demands for high rewards. Worse, the king secretly tested the idea with his own ship, which quickly returned without success. Feeling betrayed, Columbus left Portugal. Then he went to Spain, arriving as a poor foreigner. Spain's rulers, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, were consumed with war and showed little interest in his ideas. For years, Columbus followed the royal court from place to place, enduring rejection and ridicule. Many people believed his plan was foolish. Some even thought he was insane. In 1491, discouraged and nearly hopeless, Columbus left the court on foot with his young son. Stopping at the monastery of La Rábida to ask for food, he caught the attention of the prior, who recognized the importance of his ideas. The prior, once close to Queen Isabella, wrote to her on Columbus's behalf. The queen summoned Columbus, provided him with clothing and support, and reconsidered his proposal. Though Columbus's demands again caused hesitation, his supporters convinced the queen that Spain must not lose this opportunity. A royal messenger caught Columbus in the mountains and brought him back with a promise that his long-awaited voyage would finally begin. Nearly 2 centuries before Columbus ever dreamed of crossing the Atlantic, an astonishing scene unfolded in the city of Venice. One day, 3 men arrived at the gates, dressed in rough clothing, unlike anything Venetians were used to seeing. Their garments followed the style of distant China, and their faces bore the marks of long travel. They claimed to be members of the Polo family, Venetians who had left their homeland many years earlier. At first, no one believed them. They struggled to speak Italian, and even their own relatives suspected they were impostors. But doubt vanished after the men invited the city's nobles to an extraordinary feast. During the banquet, the 3 travelers appeared again and again in lavish robes of silk and fine cloth. Each time they changed clothes, the garments were cut into pieces and handed out to servants. Finally, they brought out the worn outfits they had arrived in, tore them open, and spilled out piles of glittering gemstones, treasures gathered from lands few Europeans had ever seen. One of these men was Marco Polo. He later wrote a detailed account of his journeys, describing the immense wealth, powerful rulers, and advanced cities of Asia, places that had been little more than rumors in Europe. His book spread widely, filling readers with wonder. Among those readers was Christopher Columbus. Inspired by Polo's stories, Columbus became determined to find a new route to the rich lands of the East by sailing westward across the ocean. Although the King of Spain granted Columbus authority to recruit ships and sailors, the task was painfully difficult. Seamen feared the vast unknown waters, which they called the Sea of Darkness. Many believed monsters lived there, or that ships would simply vanish. Those who finally agreed to go believed they were sailing towards death. Before departure, they took Holy Communion and said tearful goodbyes to their families. The expedition consisted of 3 small ships, only one of which had a full deck. Columbus first sailed to the Canary Islands. From there, the fleet pushed into waters no European had ever crossed. As the last familiar coastline faded from view, the sailors' courage collapsed. Columbus tried to encourage them by telling stories from Marco Polo's book of China's riches and powerful empires, but fear remained. To prevent panic, Columbus secretly kept 2 records of their journey. One showed the true distance they had traveled. The other, which he shared with his crew, greatly reduced the numbers. Still, new fears arose. The sailors noticed that the compass needle no longer pointed exactly toward the North Star. Though this was a natural phenomenon we understand today, it terrified the crew. Columbus himself may have been puzzled, but he calmly assured them all was well. The weather stayed pleasant, and steady winds pushed them westward, but even this became a cause for alarm. The sailors worried that such winds would never allow them to return home. When the wind finally shifted to the southwest, their spirits briefly lifted. Soon after, the ships entered vast stretches of floating seaweed. Panic returned. Old legends spoke of frozen oceans where ships became trapped forever. When the wind died completely, the men feared they would be stranded at sea until their ships rotted and their supplies ran out. As days passed, hunger and thirst became real concerns. The sailors grew convinced that Columbus was mad and that he was leading them all to ruin. Some even plotted to throw him overboard and claim he had fallen into the sea while gazing at the stars. False hope only deepened their despair. One day the cry of "Land!" echoed across the ships. Columbus dropped to his knees in prayer as sailors climbed the rigging, but it turned out to be nothing more than a cloud. Another false sighting on October 11th crushed morale further. Birds began appearing, songbirds, a heron, a duck, but the men no longer trusted signs of land. Then, on October 11th, they found a branch from a thorn tree bearing fresh berries. Soon after, a carved wooden stick floated by. At last, belief returned. That night, no one slept. Around 10 o'clock, Columbus noticed a faint light flickering in the distance, as though someone on shore carried a torch. At 2 in the morning, a sailor finally spotted land. At dawn on Friday, October 12, 1492, the ships lay before a small, lush island. Columbus stepped ashore dressed in scarlet, planted the Spanish flag, and knelt to kiss the ground. The island's native people watched in amazement, wondering whether these shining strangers had descended from the sky in their winged boats. The same sailors who had nearly mutinied now surrounded Columbus, embracing him and kissing his hands in gratitude. As the island's people overcame their fear, they approached the ships in canoes or swam out to them. They brought cotton thread, bread made from roots, tame parrots, and small pieces of gold. In exchange, they received colorful caps, glass beads, tiny bells, and other simple objects, items that seemed worthless to the Spaniards, but fascinating to the islanders. Thus began an encounter that would forever change the world. The first land Columbus reached was a small island he named San Salvador. Today, historians still debate which island in the West Indies it actually was. Columbus himself had no doubt. He believed he had arrived somewhere along the edge of Asia. Yet confusion troubled him. Where were the magnificent cities, the wealthy kingdoms, and the gold-covered buildings Marco Polo had described centuries earlier? Driven by this expectation, Columbus sailed from island to island in search of those legendary riches, unaware that the lands Polo had written about lay thousands of miles farther west. When he encountered the large island now known as Cuba, he convinced himself it must be part of the Asian mainland. His belief in this idea never fully faded. Throughout these early encounters, Columbus showed kindness toward the native people. On one occasion, sailors captured a frightened islander and brought him before Columbus, who stood on the raised deck of his ship. Hoping to gain favor, the terrified man offered a ball of cotton thread. Columbus gently refused the gift, but instead placed a brightly colored cap on the man's head, hung small bells from his ears, and wrapped green glass beads around his arms. Then he sent him safely back to shore. Soon after, his companions were seen admiring his new decorations with wonder. Another time, sailors intercepted an islander paddling alone over open water in a simple canoe. His supplies were modest: a piece of cassava bread, a gourd filled with water, a bit of red paint for decorating his face, and a string of beads he had traded for earlier. He was traveling to spread news of the arrival of the strange white-sailed ships. Instead of harming him, Columbus welcomed him aboard, fed him well, and returned him unharmed to his destination. While exploring the island Columbus called Hispaniola, modern Haiti and the Dominican Republic, one of his ships ran aground and was destroyed. Using timber from the wreck, Columbus ordered a small fort to be built and left a group of men there as a settlement. By early 1943, Columbus felt it was time to return to Spain and report his discoveries. In January, he set sail homeward. On January 12th, disaster nearly erased everything. A violent storm battered the ship, threatening to sink it and wipe away all proof of the journey. The crew prayed desperately and made solemn vows, believing they were facing death. Fearing the loss of his achievement, Columbus wrote 2 detailed accounts of his voyage. He sealed each inside wax-coated containers and placed them into separate barrels. One barrel was cast into the sea. The other was tied to the ship's stern so it might float free if the vessel sank. Columbus hoped that even if he were lost, the truth of his discovery would reach Europe. The ship eventually reached the Azores, where the storm finally weakened. Some sailors went ashore to fulfill their vows at a small chapel, but were arrested by the Portuguese governor. After resolving the situation, Columbus sailed again, only to be struck by another powerful storm that shredded his sails and nearly destroyed the ship. He managed to anchor at a Portuguese port, where he took quiet satisfaction in proving what Portugal had lost by rejecting his proposal years earlier. In April, Columbus arrived in Barcelona. His return was celebrated with a grand procession. Leading the parade were the native people he had brought back, painted, feathered, and adorned with bits of gold. Exotic birds, parrots, and unfamiliar treasures followed. Columbus himself walked behind them, escorted by proud Spanish knights. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella received him beneath a golden canopy and honored him by remaining seated while he spoke, an extraordinary sign of royal respect. This moment marked the peak of Columbus's life. Once dismissed as a dreamer and a madman, he now stood as the most celebrated figure in Spain. What followed, however, was largely tragedy. The settlers left behind on Hispaniola fought among themselves and treated the native people cruelly. Eventually, the islanders rebelled and destroyed the entire colony. A second settlement also failed. Columbus, though a bold explorer, struggled as a governor. Greed, disorder, and rebellion plagued the colonies. An official sent to investigate the chaos placed Columbus in chains and sent him back to Spain. The sight shocked the public and outraged the king and queen. They immediately ordered the chains removed. When Columbus appeared before Queen Isabella and saw tears in her eyes, he collapsed to his knees, overcome with emotion and unable to speak through his sobs. Thus ended the triumph and began the sorrow of one of history's most famous voyages. After his return in chains, Columbus was not allowed to resume control of the colonies he had founded. Still convinced he was close to Asia, he set out once more in 1502 on what would be his fourth and final voyage. His goal was to discover a sea passage through the mainland of South America, certain that India lay just beyond it. The journey proved disastrous. One of his ships, weakened by age and riddled with shipworms, became unfit to sail. With no choice left, Columbus ran the vessel aground near the coast of Jamaica. Using what materials they could salvage, the crew built rough shelters on the deck of the stranded ship. There, Columbus, now sick, exhausted, and unable to walk, remained trapped for nearly a year, enduring misery and uncertainty. During this desperate time, one loyal companion, Diego Mendez, often called Diaz in older accounts, undertook a daring mission. He traded nearly all he owned, a brass basin, a coat, and his last 2 shirts, to a local chief in exchange for a canoe. Braving hunger, storms, and exhaustion, he managed to reach Hispaniola to beg for help. Meanwhile, those left behind survived only by trading small trinkets for food from the local people. As time passed, discipline collapsed. Some sailors abandoned Columbus entirely and chose to live among the islanders, leaving his commander weaker and more isolated. Eventually, the islanders grew tired of exchanging valuable food for shiny but useless objects. Supplies stopped coming, and starvation loomed. Columbus, aware that a lunar eclipse was approaching, used his knowledge of astronomy to his advantage. He warned the islanders that his powerful god would punish them for refusing aid, and that the moon itself would darken as a sign of anger. That night, as the moon slowly lost its light and turned red, fear spread among the people. They rushed to Columbus with food and supplies, pleading for forgiveness. From that moment on, the Spaniards no longer lacked provisions. Rescue finally arrived, and Columbus was taken back to Spain, physically broken and deeply discouraged. Shortly afterward, Queen Isabella, his greatest supporter, died. Without her protection, Columbus faded into obscurity. He died on May 20th, 1506, still believing that he had reached the outskirts of Asia. He never realized that his voyages had revealed an entirely new continent to the world. Christopher Columbus died believing a beautiful mistake. To his final breath, he remained convinced that the islands and coastlines he had touched were the outer edges of Asia, that the golden cities of Marco Polo still waited just beyond the horizon. History would later correct him, but it would never diminish the scale of what he had done. His life stands as a paradox. Columbus was not the first to imagine a western route, nor the wisest ruler, nor the most humane leader of men. He was stubborn, flawed, often blind to consequences beyond his own vision. Yet that same stubbornness, without the refusal to abandon an idea mocked by kings, scholars, and sailors alike, the world's map might have remained incomplete for generations longer. The voyage that began with hunger at a monastery door and nearly ended in mutiny reshaped human history. Two worlds long separated by vast oceans collided. Trade routes shifted, empires rose and fell, cultures intertwined, and the course of civilization changed forever. The Atlantic Ocean, once feared as the Sea of Darkness, became a bridge rather than a boundary.
Columbus himself did not live to see the magnitude of this transformation. His final years were marked by illness, disappointment, and fading influence. The man once honored beneath a golden canopy died quietly, far from the roaring crowds that had celebrated him. Yet history does not measure greatness by comfort or clarity at life's end. Instead, it remembers the moment when 3 small ships vanished beyond the edge of the known world and did not return as expected. It remembers the courage to sail where no European believed survival was possible. It remembers a single decision to go west when every voice said turn back. Christopher Columbus never found the Asia he sought, but in chasing an illusion, he revealed a reality greater than anything he imagined. His journey reminds us that human progress is often born not from certainty, but from daring error, and that sometimes the greatest discoveries are made by those who are brave enough to be wrong.